I think the Mexican government is, if not already, going to be putting more pressure on the cartels to stop that flow of fentanyl because their relationship with the United States, their number one trading partner, is at risk. And no matter what levels of corruption we know or don't know about, I don't think the Mexican government would be willing to risk in any way their relationship with a trading partner with the United States for the movement of dope across the border.
The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
Welcome to Borderland, Narcosis, and Ironclad Original. Listen, we had Katarina on here recently. She had new information she wanted to give us. We had to bring her on as fast as possible, so consider this a bonus episode of Katarina Szulc, a correspondent who's from Canada and works down in Mexico with all the latest information currently on our cartels. So you guys, check this episode out. A lot of information. I think you need to hear it. All right. Welcome back, Katarina. We're excited to have you. The last time we had you just recently created a huge buzz for some of the information that you had. So since we've talked, there's been several things that happened, and I'm very curious to know your opinion, and I want to jump right into. So in the past few weeks, we've had two different incidents on the border involving cartels and shootings. One of them was a Border Patrol agent that was pinned down in RGV, and another one was some hikers down in the El Centro area, border of San Diego sector, getting shot at as well, and which was told to the press that was also connected to cartel. At the same time, then there's a intel report that was leaked and reported that the cartel has greenlit the U.S. military's opportunities to try and, take them out, but as well as United States Border Patrol is on that list of green lights. And let's just stop there because there's so much even videos and other stuff that's come out. So I want to talk to you about that. But let's start with this activity that we're seeing on the border in the American side. Is this from your sources, from your own experience, is this connected to the cartel?
Okay, so I think it's really important to mention right off the bat that violent interactions or shootouts between the cartel or particularly human smugglers who are working for the cartel and border agents, it's not anything new. We've seen this happen before, and one of the biggest, most recent stories actually happened in 2023, where CBP officers found some people smuggling other people across the border, and they got into a really violent shootout. Thankfully, nobody was killed or severely injured in 2023, but this also made headlines, and it was a really big deal at the time. Now we're seeing this happen again, and I'm almost positive that the reason why that this is making such big headlines this time around is because of all of this rhetoric with the FTO designation and what Donald Trump is saying and securing the borders and everything that we're kind of anticipating to see happen at the borders. And, when I was on last time, I previously mentioned that I wouldn't be surprised if there was an increase in violent interactions at the borders. And we were getting a lot of that reporting from inside sources that they've greenlit violence at the borders. Now, after this made headlines this time around, that narrative within the cartels and border regions shifted really quick. It was like overnight, Cartel De Noreste, the Northeast cartel, put out that video saying, hey guys, just so you know, we are not engaging in violent acts with any U.S. authorities, any U.S. Border Patrol. That is not our plan, and that is not what we're looking to do. And then I also went to the border region and interviewed some members of the cartel in a different region from Tamaulipas, who told me, well, the person in charge told me that they are not planning to engage in any violent acts with U.S. authorities. They don't want to be a part of that. They don't want to engage in that. That isn't their goal. Basically the same thing that was said in the Cartel Del Noreste video. At the same time, I think it's really important to remember that you know, the cartels in Mexico could literally be considered like a Fortune 500. This is an extremely lucrative and multi-level business in a way. These organizations have hundreds of people, thousands of people even working for them. I think like in most recent stats, it's like the fifth largest employer in Mexico, which if true is absolutely insane. And if that's the case, just imagine how many people are working for these cartels, which means how many people are getting orders and how many people are willing to follow those orders and others who not so much, who feel like the FTO Act was almost like a personal attack. And so when I went to the border region to speak with these members of the cartel, of course, the man who was in charge told me, we're not going to engage and we have no reason to be violent with these officers and we're going to let it die down. He actually said, basically word for word, we're just going to wait it out 4 years and then we'll be in the clear, which I thought was crazy. Yeah, I actually have that on video. It's going to be coming up in my new YouTube video. But one of the men who's working in a less powerful position by a lot, who's working for this man, I interviewed him and he told me that if push comes to shove, he is eventually willing to make the decision to violently engage. If that means he has to protect his territory, his job, so to speak, and his money. And this is a person who was living in the United States. He's a deportee and he now works for the cartel. And he said that if it wasn't for his employment with the cartels, that he wouldn't be making enough money that he needs to support his family members that are still living in the United States. And if that means violently engaging with members of authority who are threatening his money and his position in the cartel, he will do so. And so I think it's just really interesting that, we've gotten this widespread response from cartels along the border region, publicly saying, whether it's through their own videos or to me, a journalist, saying we don't want to engage, we're not going to be doing that. This is peace and calm and love. But there are other folks who are in lesser positions or don't hold as much power and are saying that I'm willing to do this. And I think that these recent interactions at the border are a solid example of that. But I think it's also important for people to keep in mind that this is nothing new.
I'll tell you this from my experience. Like I said, I was an agent for many years, and it is not as common as I think some of the world believes shootouts happen on the border. Does it happen? Yeah. You're dealing with drugs. You're dealing with, territory. You're dealing with law enforcement, like the good versus bad kind of thing. But just to have two incidents so close together and then immediately tied to cartel, I was like, man, is this stirring up? Is this about to be the new norm? Every couple of weeks, another shootout, another issue. And I do agree that I find it fascinating that, there's a totem pole. And if you're low on the totem pole, you're scratching and clawing yourself up to the top. And if that means you have to get your drugs across to get paid, you will risk a lot more than the person at the top. And you will avoid, the thought of, hey, there is no green light, relax. Well, then you're sitting there thinking, yeah, but if I don't get this drugs across, I don't get paid. And so I understand how higher ups would say, no, we don't have that feeling, or we're not going to be doing that. And the people low on the totem pole and say, I have to make whatever decision I have to get paid. And so, yeah.
And it was very interesting because I actually interviewed the man lower on the totem pole first before I interviewed his boss. And so when he told me this, it kind of confirmed that idea that I had already had and the information that I had already received, that we are willing to engage, we are willing to be violent if that means that we are going to get paid, right? So when I spoke to the boss, and this was before that Noreste video came out of them saying we're not going to engage, when I interviewed the boss and he says to me, no, we're not doing this, I thought, this is someone who is not as worried about their money. Or perhaps there's, another side of this that could be true, is we're being told this message and they're spreading this message, these top dogs saying we're not going to engage, but maybe that's not the message that they're spreading to their people, and maybe that's not actually their plan. You never know. It's speaking with criminals, and it's taking a message from people who do illegal things. So I don't think that they would have any sort of reasons to tell us the full truth, tell us exactly what their plan is. And of course, Vincent, your experience too with the border is far more long lasting, and you have a lot more than I do. And I said this previously, and I still, believe it. I'd say like 80% is that there are probably going to be more violent encounters at the border, because even if these bosses are telling us one thing and spreading one message to the public, that doesn't mean that other people aren't going to engage. And it doesn't necessarily mean that their message is the full truth.
Yeah. When you saw that video with the cartel members all kitted up, right? They look like soldiers. They got their face covered. A pretty intimidating look from my perspective. I was like, man, that's interesting. A cartel is fully suited just like a military, like a small paramilitary unit. But what was the purpose? I thought it was fascinating that he would even think to, like, let's put a video out and let them know we're not a threat. Like, what in your community of journalists, I'm sure everyone was like, what the fuck is this about? What did you guys think?
Not really, because we've gotten quite a few videos, over time from Cartel De Noreste, where they do these. They kind of do their own press conferences, and they're fully geared up. It's obviously looks very intimidating, right? Because they look like soldiers, but they're like vigilantes in a way, I guess. But they do this often, especially when there's a big topic kind of stirring and brewing in this political pot. So that video didn't surprise me. What surprised me was, of course, what they were saying. And the reason that they do this, and they mention their community a lot in this, in Nuevo Laredo, and they're in Tamaulipas, is that we've seen this historically, but the cartels typically work to gain a sense of trust in their community, and in a way to kind of maintain this governance that they've imposed in their communities. So that video was very much, hey, everyone who's in our territory, like civilians, we want you to know there's nothing to worry about. Be calm. We're not engaging. You guys can go out. They even say, like, live your lives as normal and don't be afraid. And that's very much giving cartel vibes. They've done this. This is like what Pablo Escobar used to do. It's, hey, we're going to build that church. We're going to get you the fresh water. We're going to fix that school. This is them imposing that level of governance that they've taken on to make sure that their community members feel safe, and to gain that trust in their community of, you can count on us. We'll keep you safe, and we're not going to start a war.
Yeah, it sounds so much like the Italian mafia, where it's like, hey, we'll protect you, you pay your taxes, and don't worry about it. They're building rapport with these really weird acts, but the truth of the matter is they're causing the chaos.
Yes. And, I think it's really important to mention, and I wanted to mention this before, and it's, I've talked a lot about the chaos that the cartels cause, the corruption within the Mexican government. I think it's also important to mention the United States government. Of course, it goes both ways. And I have a whole deep dive, really digestible story about this on my Substack that goes back to the 80s, even before that. We're talking about the CIA involvement and the cartels and really everything. But it's really important to also consider that, and, I don't want you to take this in the wrong way, but there are Border Patrol members, CBP officers, who are also in the cartel pockets. The corruption. Yeah, I know. Oh my God, breaking news. No, I know we know this, but I think it's important to mention, because when I'm talking about all of these players, I don't want to miss any information, and I don't want to leave anyone out. And I think it's important to mention too, like, I just spoke with a source that I have within this realm of border security, who told me, we're trying to crack down on American enforcers, people who are working on the border, who we believe to be letting people pass through, or letting drug shipments pass through. And that corruption runs even deeper in the quarters of the US government. Of course, And of course, at the same time, there's a lot of conspiracy theories. And, I try not to play into that. I'll always kind of let people say their piece and believe everyone can believe what they want. But at the same time, when you have two governments, I mean, I would even say three at this point, because I would count the cartel almost as a government. They have so much money and so much power. When you have these three key players dealing with a lot of money, a lot of drugs, and the livelihoods and even just the lives of innocent people, it's very scary to think about that there could be this increased, erupted war along a very vulnerable region, because the US-Mexico border is a very vulnerable region. And, we've seen the deployment of the additional 10,000 National Guard from Mexico side onto
I
the
was
border.
just about to ask about that. Yeah.
This has happened before. They deployed like 15,000 in 2019. They deployed another 15,000 in, I think, 2020. And we're seeing it again. So again, this isn't really anything new, but of course it's making headlines. Why? Because this is what we're all focused on. And because Trump, like I always say, is really loud about what he wants people to be focused on. And he wants people to be focused on the border. I mean, that was sort of why a major reason why he won the election. So of course, when things like this are happening, it seems like, oh my God, this is crazy, but it's happened before.
Yeah. So you've seen the numbers just recently. The numbers from the CBP have stated that there's almost a dramatic drop of illegal immigration coming into America. Extremely dramatic. I'm talking turn the water on, turn the water off. And is there, in that sense, since there's less illegal immigration happening, there's more enforcement. That, in my opinion, means there's less drugs coming across as well. Is that something that some of your, informants or some of your sources are telling you?
First of all, I'm very skeptical when it comes to the reportings of illegal immigration or the flow of drugs, because how do you quantify something that's happening hidden? How do you quantify something that's happening illegally? It's the black market. And it's very hard for me to understand that you can tell me just how many people are illegally coming into the country and that there's this dramatic drop. I mean, sure, there are ways to quantify this, but I still have a hard time with it. It's even like right now at the Canadian border, there's like a press release multiple times a week about how much fentanyl they've seized and how much it's gone up. And is that because there's a larger flow of fentanyl, or because they've Canadian border officers have cracked down more? It's really hard for me to quantify these stats, and I'm not an expert when it comes to statistics, and I'm a journalist, so I'm very critical when I'm looking at these things. Now, in terms of the flow of drugs, it's really important to keep in mind that typically these hard drugs like fentanyl are coming across the border not through always the tunnels, but through regular border crossings. And this is also because of that sort of nefarious relationship that some of these members with the cartel have built with Border Patrol agents. When I was speaking to my sources there, asking them about this, they were very tight-lipped. And I understand why, because this is a very vulnerable time for them and for their illegal business. What I can assume is I think the Mexican government is, if not already, going to be putting more pressure on the cartels to stop that flow of fentanyl, because their relationship with the United States, their number one trading partner, is at risk. And no matter what levels of corruption we know or don't know about, I don't think the Mexican government would be willing to risk in any way their relationship with a trading partner with the United States for the movement of dope across the border. And I kind of saw this firsthand when I was interviewing my sources. I couldn't even believe this was real, because what are the odds that I go to this area to speak to people who are running the drug trade in this area? And as I'm there, keep in mind, it was dark, it was late evening, the marina shows up. I mean, the military comes in and they're right outside the place, the meeting place where we were. And the meeting place where I met them is where they operate out of. And they're looking for stuff. I got some viz of it. And to me, the entire vibe changed with the people that I was with, and it became quite tense. And they were also very frustrated because that's not something that typically happens. And they told me that typically if government shows up, that they have to just kind of pay them off because they know that they're doing illegal activity, and they just expect to sort of pay out. But this time, they were working. They were looking for someone or something. And I think that is an indicator that the Mexican government has made authoritative agencies along the border, along the Mexican side, to be really doing their job, to crack down in a sense.
To be legit.
Exactly. And so I think that that's definitely going to impact that flow, particularly of fentanyl across the border. But like my source said, we're going to tough it out 4 years. Whether that, is how it's really going to work or not, I'm not sure. And I'm not in the trade, obviously. But I thought that really stood out to me, of course.
Yeah, that's fascinating to think that they can wait 4 years. That in a business sense, like, let's just shut down the business for 4 years. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's going to happen. I also don't think that our government agencies have 100% lockdown on all ability to transport drugs, right? By flight, by boat, by whatever, by tunnel. We all know. Two things. So your sources have mentioned that they do have CBP officers that are on the pay scale, pretty much.
Yes. Yeah.
Jesus, that hurts me deep to hear that, because I know corruption runs deep, right? And I know what it's like to be in a border town and know what the pay is, the average income in a town, and then to know that, one load, one this, one that could pretty much make a lot of money for certain people who really need it. So I understand how corruption happens and how it flips. It's unfortunate. It's not the first time I've ever heard of it. We've seen and actually been able to catch a few agents throughout the years involved in some of these corrupt actions, but it is hard for me to hear. The next is El Ricky. He was the recent one of the I guess he's considered one of the bosses, correct, of the CDN.
Okay, so I think this is going to start happening a lot where, the Mexican government has always and will always put out, like, when they capture someone, like a Plaza boss, which El Ricky was a Plaza boss. So
Plaza boss, there it is. Thank you.
He's not like the top leader of CDN and like this crazy capture. I actually have a lot to say about this because the Mexican government will always put out when they capture someone like this, especially someone who plays a significant role in the drug trade. Now, when this was posted, I saw a lot of people on Twitter, especially, saying, "Look at this! Mexico is really cracking down, and they captured a boss. He wasn't this huge boss." And people were saying, "See, Trump's pressure is working." This is them doing their job, and this is what they've always done. And keep in mind, Trump first, and people were saying that this was because of the tariffs, that they had to go out and catch someone and post him up. They've always done this. I mean, you can even look back at my Twitter feed, and I'll post that stuff all the time. It doesn't mean that this guy was like the El Chapo of the CDN. He certainly wasn't, actually. But this operation, from what I've been told by a source in the government, had been going on since before Trump even threatened tariffs. So Trump first mentioned the threat of tariffs in November, and this operation to find El Ricky was already underway. I actually received photos of the ops going in and like looking for him months ago. So I don't think that this was like a reaction to any action that Trump had taken or any comments that he had made. This is normal. And this is normal in Mexico. Why? Because there are so many figures within the cartel, and law enforcement will go after certain figures, and there are operations to take down the bad guys. This was one of those.
I heard something else that was interesting. I might be wrong. It might be a little unprofessional to stumble on this, but is it true that El Mencho's wife was released as well from prison?
She was, yeah. And she was released a lot earlier than she should have been.
And why do you think that is? Sorry, go ahead.
Honestly, it certainly comes down to corruption and power and money. And I don't really want to get into the nitty gritty of exactly why, just because, also when I'm talking about a lot of this stuff, I think people have to always keep in mind that, I'll put on the brave face and I'm talking about it because it's my job, but I'm getting a lot of messages and a lot of comments that are also sometimes kind of scary. And so there are certain things I could give you the information that I think that is about this, but if I don't exactly know, or if I don't have a source that has told me, I'm not going to share that information that I think could be true. Everything that I share, it's because I think, I've verified it in the ways that I operate. But when it comes to El Mencho's wife, I'm not entirely sure why. I can definitely say that it has to do with corruption and power and money. And the whole ordeal with El Mencho and CJNG right now is extremely complex because I can't tell you exactly the reason why she was released and as early as she was. But there's rumors right now that El Mencho is actually dead. But we heard those same rumors about his son-in-law, who was and ended up being arrested in Riverside just a few months ago, living in a $4 million house that was paid for in cash with El Mencho's daughter. So I don't know. And I don't want to take any guesses.
Yeah, it is fascinating, but I just don't understand. Is it common practice for the wives to be released early, or is it common practice? I don't want, and also don't ever say anything that you don't feel comfortable with. I'm going to dig. I'm just curious, but,
go for it.
Just to think about a wife being released, does this woman have any kind of power? I would imagine in the cartel space, it's like, well, they can just buy another wife. So there's got to be some significance to this woman for her to have that much power and ability to get out early.
Certainly there's significance to any family members of the top capos in the cartel, because typically, it runs like a family business. Everyone really plays their role. There isn't any capo whose daughters or sons or brothers and sisters don't play a role in this. I mean, if they're not making the top decisions, they usually play a role in laundering the money. And that's why it operates like a family business. So of course he could get a new wife, buy a new wife, but it's not about that. It's about, of course, the loyalty, because this is someone she's family. This is someone who probably, obviously played a significant role in these nefarious dealings, and they don't want that person sitting and rotting in jail. To them, of course, it's like a slap in the face. Yeah,
it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
And I would assume that they're willing to do anything and pay anything and anyone to get that person out. If
it was my wife, I'd be, you know what I mean? It'd be the same. You do everything you have to get her out. You know what I mean?
Of course. Like in any family dynamic, actually, aside from the cartels, I think that you would really do anything possible.
You just hear these ideas, the media, the movies, television haven't really made, I don't know the truth behind what a cartel family looks like. And in some of those movies, you just have 20 wives. You know what I mean? And so when you hear that one wife has that much significance, that's saying something that's a little different than what I've been told through film, television, and also the media. It shows that there is a loyalty. It shows there is a significance to that relationship, and which makes it even more significant that she was released early, which makes me think other things now, reconnection of the couple, things like that. And so it's always interesting. And again, if it was my wife, I'd scorch the earth, you know what I mean? Just to get her back. So I get it. You saw the video about the drone assassination of the general, correct?
Yes.
What did you guys think about that?
We're not going to talk about this one.
Okay. Sounds good. I completely understand. Can I give you my opinion?
Yeah, go for it. Would love it.
I do have a background in psychological operations. Part of my military career was that, and a lot of the stuff that the cartel uses its social media for, I believe, is a version of that, whether they know what they're doing or not, but it gains an emotional response to the audience. And the audience is us. We're all watching, right? Right now, you can go on TikTok and watch multiple different TikTok pages showing that to use their, their smuggling company because they'll help you get across and whatnot. They're using our easy of flow information, and it's doing a counter effect to the American people. It's creating terror, right, to our own communities that are in the
propaganda.
Yeah, right. They're in the most of the people in America are in this space of they really don't know what to think, and everything they see is like terrifying, And I believe when they released that out, it was completely intentional to say, here's the capabilities that we have, and here's how
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for quite a few months now, especially since the infighting broke out in Culiacan on September 9th, I have been receiving plenty of videos and photos of the drone capabilities and explosives in cartel-ridden regions. And of course, it exists, and they do have these capabilities. But to a certain extent, the cartels are propaganda experts. They use TikTok, and they're putting like songs in the background, and it's like you watch it, and any person, especially like a young person watching it, they're like, holy shit, like these guys are legit. And I've been receiving a lot of these, and I think it is in a way to flex the muscles, to show, look, we've got this. Look, my dick is bigger than yours. I say that all the time, but it really is. That's a great example of that. Of look at our explosive. We can blow shit up. We can blow people up. We have drones, and we have digital capacities too, whether that's Pegasus or cloning WhatsApp or anything. And they're very public about this. Of course, it's to flaunt their muscles and show what they really are capable of, but it's also, like you said, it's to instill terror, and it's a form of propaganda.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the president, Claudia Sheinbaum. The last time we talked, you mentioned that your source told us that she was absolutely terrified. Since that moment, we've seen a lot of different kind of things that happened in the media. One, that she was refusing. Next is she's helping. Next is the tariffs. Next is the 10,000 soldiers. And so it seems to kind of be going this back and forth, trying to navigate this waters with Trump, right? And trying to see, how do I please him at the same time, not create, the drama with the tariffs, and then at the same time still save face. And that's what it feels like from my position, kind of watching. She's trying to save face. She's trying to still prove to her people that she's in charge. But at the same time, there's some actions by Trump and the administration that are making her make decisions that might not necessarily make. Can you confirm that?
For sure. Yeah, 100%. And I've noticed that with actually both leaders that are having to kind of bend down to Trump, is Justin Trudeau and Claudia Sheinbaum have both done this, where they're both being like, no, we're standing our ground and we're super tough and strong. And then next thing you know, it's like, oh, actually, psych, we're just going to actually just go with what he says. And even Canada is appointing a fentanyl czar right now. And they're doing this whole overhaul of how to stop fentanyl moving into the United States, even though when I was doing a lot of the reporting about how there is a significant flow of fentanyl from Canada into the United States, I was getting a ton of calls and tweets and everything, and people saying it's like less than 1% and it's not significant. And I mean, come on, really, any amount of fentanyl that could kill thousands of people, in my opinion, is significant, whether you think so or not. But both of these leaders are trying to save face, are trying to be strong, but they're being strong-armed by Trump. And at the end of the day, they are coming to solutions that he wanted them to come to in the first place. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to continue to play out, especially when his main concerns are the borders. Because now, Claudia sent those 10,000 National Guard to the border. Canada's appointing a fentanyl czar and is putting out a press release like exhaustingly every week about how much fentanyl they're stopping. And it's almost like a show. to show Trump, hey, look at us. We're doing exactly what you want. We're securing the borders. But how much of this really differs from the status quo, from what was already being done, from the National Guard that was deployed to the Mexican-U.S. border in 2019 and 2020, to the fentanyl that was being cracked down on, the flow from Canada to America in previous years as well. It, to me, from the perspective of someone who has been tuned into this for the past couple of years and has been doing a lot of reporting, and I've always been with it in terms of the flow of fentanyl and border security. Not a lot of stuff looks different other than Trump asking for the status quo to be turned up a notch, and then both leaders saying, whoa, 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 no, we know what we should be doing, and we're not going to do what you say. And then them eventually doing exactly what he wanted. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. And, both of these governments, like Mexico and Canada, and I think Trump can kind of take advantage of this, are in my opinion, a state of flux, because Claudia Sheinbaum, she became president just in October. She was elected in June. So unfortunately for her, in the short time that she's been in power, there has been so much going on. And then Justin Trudeau just recently resigned in January. So these are two, in a way, I don't want to say unstable governments, but they're not in the same position Trump is in. Because, and I know Trump just recently was inaugurated, but he's been president before. He's done this before, and he knows he can't run again. So these are three players that are trying to navigate a really complicated relationship. But you know what? Good thing we're hosting the World Cup all together.
Oh my goodness.
They say like sports brings people together.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's something we always talk about: the southern border. It's on the news all the time, but we very rarely talk about the northern border. Is there cartel organizations in the northern border in Canada?
Of course. Yeah, I broke this, or I did this story in the summer. I went and met up with a member of the Sinaloa cartel and did an interview, who was running operations in British Columbia, the west coast of Canada, and they are producing and trafficking fentanyl, and they work with Indian gangs in Canada.
Indian gangs, Native American?
Sorry, no, like India.
Got it.
People from like Indian gangs. Yeah. There's quite a few, there's like Brothers Keepers, United Nations. These are two, Canadian gangs, and typically made up of people from Indian descent. And a lot of these cartel members are working with what we would call in Canada, and what law enforcement would call them, is the uncles. So older Indian men who have run the drug trade and criminal organizations in Canada for years. And now they've teamed up with the cartels. And the flow of the precursors is easily coming into the port of Vancouver because, there are a lot of people of Indian descent who work at the port, who have ties or family members with these gangs that are working directly with the cartels. And the precursors that are coming from China, there are so many shipments coming from China, and there's a massive Chinese population in Canada, and particularly in the West Coast. And so it's really like this multinational collaboration. If you really think about it, these people are collaborating better than North America as a whole, in a way, to run this organization, this criminal ring. And they are moving fentanyl into the United States. And I think that this is going to be amped up. If you look at statistics, and a lot of people will argue, the flow of fentanyl from Canada into the United States is nothing compared to the flow of fentanyl from Mexico into the United States. But when I spoke with my source from the cartel who was operating in Canada, he said that it fluctuates the amount that they are moving. And that's because Canadian Border Patrol will flag certain shipments at different times. It comes in waves. And sometimes, if they start creating pills, which is what he said in my interview, that raises more red flags and creates more worry within Canadian authorities. But Canada has a major fentanyl crisis. I mean, more people died of fentanyl overdose deaths during the pandemic than they did of COVID. And the provincial health officer at that time, when she had her daily COVID press briefings, she cried about just the sheer amount of people who were suffering from this addiction and were dying and were losing family members to this. And so the production and the trafficking and the consumption of fentanyl in Canada is a major issue, and the cartel plays a major role in that. And they're playing a major role in using Canada in a way as a proxy to get this stuff into the United States, because they know that that southern border has this big eye on them and Big Brother is watching. Whereas in Canada, we, for the most part, have a pretty unsecured border. It's pretty under the radar. And, it actually just came out, I think this broke yesterday or the day before. A family was crossing into Canada from the United States illegally. And we have a lot of unprotected border, but obviously our weather doesn't really permit for a lot of crossings, because speaking of that, someone just died. It was, I think, a family of like 6 or 7. There were children with them, not even properly dressed for the weather. And someone died. They were trying to cross into Alberta, which is a prairie state in Canada, because the weather is very extreme. But I think that also the panic of people who are living undocumented in the US is also extreme. And these people are going to try to get into Canada. Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
that was a very long-winded response. There's so much to talk about here. Everyone plays a role. And I also do think that the Canadian border, generally, what's going on and the flow of people and drugs goes significantly underreported. And it's really unfortunate, because it's affecting the lives of so many people, whether that's people who are dying of fentanyl overdose deaths, people who are losing family members to this, or people who are dying trying to cross into Canada. It's very tragic. And it really deeply upsets me.
Yeah, it's funny. We've done a lot of this podcast about the southern border. We haven't had too many talk about the northern border. So I just realized, like, you're a Canadian citizen. Like, let's ask you, and a journalist and someone who works on this same topic. So I'm glad I asked that question. And you know what? I almost think that in the next few weeks, we should circle back on the Canadian border focus 100%, because we don't have any episodes that focus all on that.
And there isn't a lot of focus on that. And, it just so happens that I'm, to my knowledge, really the only person who's Canadian and covering United States and Mexico relations and the cartel and the war on drugs. And so I always, I'm like the NAFTA journalist, because I can really speak to what's going on across both borders and this flow. And I have sources within Canadian border agencies and the American ones and the Mexican ones. And even actually I spoke to a source within the Canadian border agency not that long ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. And he was telling me that they're working on an operation that has to do with border agents being paid off in the United States and in Mexico to get people into Canada. And most of those people are actually going into the East Coast, which is interesting, because the flow of fentanyl is coming from the West Coast of Canada. So, you're kind of being, it's there's no escape here. Both sides, yeah, exactly, are being used as ports of entry or exit for something that's illegal, whether it's people or whether it's drugs.
Yeah, it's crazy. The Canadian border has a lot of drive-throughs where they just load up in a vehicle and they just drive across the border. It's like just drive across and then get out and run, whatever. But yeah, there's a lot
most of the people who are trafficking fentanyl from Canada into the United States are Canadian citizens and people who are very under the radar. You have housewives, you have, regular white collar workers, just people that you would never think are trafficking fentanyl, but who need extra money. And for a lot of people in Canada, money is very tight right now, especially since the pandemic. This has been a major issue. When I was still working at a newsroom in Canada, I did a report on just how many Canadians were using the food banks to supplement their groceries because they couldn't afford it. And these are people who are dual income households, maybe with like a kid or two. And their lives and their quality of life has been deeply impacted by the economy. And so it just created this increase of people who were willing to make extra money. And whether that was through nefarious means, so be it.
Just another question on Canada, just because I'm just curious. Was Trump's election have any effect on Russia? On Canada, besides what we see recently on the news with Trudeau? Is there anything that it could potentially affect or has affected that people might be happy or upset about?
Well, certainly for trade, which was also why, he imposed the tariffs on Canada as well, because Canada and the U.S., they have a very strong trade relationship. Of course, Canada, the U.S., Mexico, NAFTA, it's called something else now. But basically, in essence, Trump's presidency will affect both neighboring countries and has been affecting both neighboring countries to, the nth degree. And it will continue to do so. It will be very interesting, though, because Canada is going to have an election very soon,
right,
especially since Trudeau's resignation. And one of the candidates is very much mirrors that of Trump and his policies and his way of leadership. And, I am not a political science expert, but just from what I've seen and a lot of rhetoric, there are a lot of people who are very much in support of Pierre Poilievre. He's one of the candidates who will be running. And, Trudeau lost a lot of support, especially towards the end of his leadership. And it would be very interesting if Canada and the US have two very similar leaders in terms of policy and trade, really anything, and their opinions on fentanyl and the drug war. And then you have Mexico, who of all three countries would probably be the most liberal, sort of left-leaning government. I would be very interested to see how that's going to play out. But I don't know, what's going to happen in Canada. And I think a lot of people are waiting to find out as well.
Yeah, Trudeau started to lean more towards, and similarly to like the left-leaning ideologies in America, that it seemed like, right, the country voted opposite of that because of that frustrations for whatever reasons. But also Trudeau was starting to make choices that were very similar, aligned with those same ideologies. So I don't know what the pulse is of Canada, but it seems like there was a lot of frustration building on some of the choices he was making. And so I imagine maybe you have the same thing you had here in America, where everyone just, boom, votes the opposite direction just to see change.
It typically happens, right? That way in politics, the pendulum always swings the opposite direction. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens in Canada's upcoming election. And I think that that's going to really impact that northern border for you guys too, because there's going to be like this crazy crackdown perhaps between both governments. It's very hard to say, and it would be very interesting to see how Cartel reacts too, because especially over the last years, Cartel presence in Canada has really gained momentum. I would say perhaps over the last 8 years, it's really, that's when we've seen this really increase of Mexican cartel members in Canada, which is why actually Canada never required a visa until recently, I think in the last year, for people from Mexico going into Canada. And I think that that's because of the understanding that Mexican drug cartels started to really mark their territory up north.
Wow. All right. Last question. Or really just any last statement to the American people, right? A lot of the American people are really nervous about what's going on, right? Should we be worried about, a potential overflow of some of the violence coming into America even further? Is there potential threats coming to America from the cartel side? Anything you have for the viewers so they can maybe either comfort them or give them more information on the subject?
I get asked this question all the time, and I always say it's not my job, and I would never put my, want to advise people how they should feel or how they should protect themselves, because I don't know, but I always say it's just really important to be very smart. And especially, if you feel like anyone or you yourself have any sort of nefarious dealings or contacts, keep in mind that, this FTO designation is still in its early stages, and we're still, at least for me personally, I'm kind of desperately waiting to hear what Rubio has to say and who he's going to designate. But a lot of these cartels will be on the border regions as well, and it's important to just be smart, and don't put yourself in situations that could possibly be dangerous for you. Keep alert, but also, have some humanity and some understanding of what's going on and how many lives are going to be affected, how many lives have been affected by this cartel violence, by corruption between all levels of government. I think it's very important that people stay critical and that they read and ask questions, and that they keep an open mind when it comes to having, open rhetoric around these topics, because it affects everyone. When we're talking about immigration and borders and drugs and organized crime, there really isn't anyone, whether it's you, me, my neighbor, your niece, or whoever it is. Everyone is really impacted by these types of policies.
Love it. Katarina, really appreciate your time again. Every time you're on
Thank
here,
you.
I've learned something new, and I think the audience loves the way you deliver the message. If you don't mind, tell them where they can find you for more information, for your Substack, everything.
Awesome. Thank you again for having me on. It was really great. And if anyone wants to read more into what I'm reporting on, you can go to my Substack. It's my full name, Katarina Szulc. It's $5 a month, and there are some free articles every now and then. Also, I'm going to be posting this sort of a long form interview and explanation into how the cartels are responding to this FTO designation, with a primary source, cartel members along the border. That's going to be on my YouTube. I'm going to be launching that channel. So I think by the time this podcast comes out, it should be out. So I'd love if you guys could go take a look at that and subscribe to it. And I'm always open to criticism and you guys letting me know exactly what more you want to see, or if you have any questions. And same for you, Vince, whatever you want to know. If it doesn't get me killed, I'll talk about it. Or even if
we definitely don't want that. But, if there's something that you want to share to the audience, that's what we've created this platform for people like you to go ahead and have a bigger voice. And so we just appreciate your time, man. We really do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Ironclad creates premium content no matter the environment. From extreme elements to unforgiving terrain, we thrive on crafting content that captures the essence of your brand in the most challenging conditions. Bring your brand story to life, ensuring your message leaves an impact. Ready to elevate your vision? Connect with us today at ironcladagency.com.